You know, dear ones, when I married my beloved Harold 43 years ago, I never imagined that the biggest challenge in my golden years wouldn't be arthritis or memory loss, but a young woman who would make me question everything I thought. I knew about dignity, respect, and family. Let me start from the very beginning, because every story worth telling has roots that run deep. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson, though most folks around Millbrook called me Dot. I raised 4 children, on Harold's modest salary from the lumber mill, stretching every dollar until it screamed for mercy. We weren't poor, mind you, but we weren't rich either. We were what my grandmother used to call decent folk. The kind who paid their bills on time, helped their neighbors, and never put on airs about anything. For 40 years, I shopped at Penny's and Sears, buying practical clothes that would last. A good wool coat could serve me 15 winters if I took care of it properly. My dresses were simple but clean, my shoes sturdy but polished. I took pride in my appearance, even if my wardrobe wasn't what you'd call fashionable by today's standards. My youngest son, Thomas, we called him Tommy, was always my gentle soul. While his brothers roughhoused and played football, Tommy preferred books and helping me in the kitchen. He grew up to be a successful accountant in the city, something that filled Harold and me with such pride we could hardly contain ourselves at church socials. When Tommy turned 32, he brought home a girl named Vivian. Now, Vivian was beautiful. I'll give her that. She had the kind of sleek blonde hair that looked like it cost more than my monthly groceries, and she wore clothes with names I couldn't even pronounce. Everything about her seemed to gleam and sparkle, from her manicured nails to her designer handbag. At first, I was thrilled. My boy had found love, and wasn't that what every mother wanted? I welcomed Vivian with open arms, invited her to family dinners, and even offered to teach her my famous apple pie recipe, the one that had won the county fair 3 years running. But Vivian, bless her heart, wasn't interested in family recipes or warm embraces. She was polite enough when Tommy was around, but I began to notice things. The way her eyes would sweep over my living room with its handmade doilies and family photographs, the slight wrinkle of her nose when she sat on my 40-year-old sofa, the way she'd inspect her fingernails when I spoke about the church auxiliary or my garden club. The wedding was a grand affair, much grander than Harold and I could afford, but Tommy insisted on paying for most of it. Vivian wore a dress that cost more than our car, and everything was photographed by some fancy photographer from the city. I wore my best dress, a navy blue number I'd bought for my daughter Margaret's wedding 5 years prior. It was classic, timeless, and I felt quite elegant in it. That's when the comments started. "Oh, Dorothy," Vivian said, with that sweet smile that never quite reached her eyes. "That's such an interesting choice. Very vintage." The way she said vintage made it sound like she was saying moldy. I brushed it off. Newlyweds were nervous after all, and maybe she was just trying to make conversation. But after they moved into their new house, a beautiful colonial that made our little ranch look like a cottage, the comments became more frequent and more pointed. "Dorothy, you really should update your wardrobe," she'd say when I'd visit. "Those styles went out in the 80s. Or, "I just don't understand how people can leave the house looking so outdated." The worst part was that she never said these things when Tommy was around. She was clever about that. She'd wait until he was in the garage or taking a phone call, then she'd make her little observations with that concerned expression, as if she was doing me a favor by pointing out my shortcomings. For months I endured this. I told myself that family was family, that love meant accepting people as they were, that maybe Vivian was just young and didn't know better. Harold, God rest his soul, passed away that winter, and I thought surely this tragedy would bring us closer together. Surely, in the face of loss, petty concerns about clothing would seem insignificant. I was wrong. At Harold's funeral, I wore my black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral 10 years earlier. It was appropriate, respectful and clean, but as we stood graveside, I caught Vivian whispering to her sister, both of them glancing at me with barely concealed amusement. "Can you believe she wore that old thing?" I heard Vivian say. "It looks like something from a thrift store." That night, alone in my empty house, I cried for the first time since Harold's diagnosis. Not just for my husband, but for the humiliation of being mocked at his funeral by the woman my son loved. Things got worse after that. Vivian seemed emboldened by my grief, as if she sensed weakness and decided to pounce. When I'd bring Tommy his favorite cookies, she'd make comments about my quaint little outfits. When we'd go out to dinner as a family, she'd suggest I might be more comfortable at certain restaurants, code for places where my simple dresses wouldn't stand out. The breaking point came on my 67th birthday. Tommy had organized a small family dinner at their house. I'd spent all morning getting ready, putting on my best dress, a floral print I'd bought for Easter, and even getting my hair done at Marge's beauty parlor. I felt good about myself for the first time in months. When I arrived, Vivian opened the door, wearing what I later learned was a Chanel suit. She looked me up and down, and I saw something shift in her expression. It wasn't just disapproval anymore. It was something closer to disgust. "Oh, Dorothy," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You really can't keep wearing these old-fashioned things. It's embarrassing." She paused, looking around as if checking to see who might be watching. "I mean, what will people think?" That night, I went home and stood in front of my bedroom mirror for a long time. I looked at my reflection, a woman who had raised 4 children, buried her parents and her husband, volunteered at the church for 30 years, and always tried to be kind to everyone she met. But all I could see were Vivian's words. Embarrassing, old-fashioned, what will people think? For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of who I was. I spent the next few weeks avoiding family gatherings. When Tommy called to invite me to dinner, I'd make excuses. When he dropped by unexpectedly, I'd hide in the back room until he left. I couldn't bear the thought of facing Vivian's critical gaze again. But isolation only made things worse. I found myself shopping for clothes I couldn't afford and didn't understand. I'd stand in department stores, completely lost, staring at price tags that made my pension check look like pocket change. Salespeople would approach me with that special kind of politeness reserved for people who clearly don't belong, and I'd mumble something about just looking before fleeing to my car. One particularly low evening, I was sitting in my living room, surrounded by fashion magazines I'd bought in a desperate attempt to understand what I was supposed to look like. The pages were full of women half my age wearing clothes that cost more than my monthly expenses. I felt ridiculous, hopeless, and completely lost. That's when I found the envelope. It was tucked behind Harold's chair, where he used to keep important papers. Inside was a letter in his shaky handwriting, dated just a week before he passed away. "My dearest Dot," it read, "I know I haven't been the best at saying feelings out loud, but I need you to know something. In 43 years of marriage, you have never been anything less than beautiful to me. Not because of what you wore or how you looked, but because of who you are. You are kind, generous, strong, and loving. Any person who can't see that isn't worth your worry. When I'm gone, don't let anyone make you feel small. You're worth 10 of any fancy person who thinks clothes make the woman. Remember, that dignity comes from inside, not from a department store. Love always, Harold." I must have read that letter 50 times that night, and somewhere between reading number 49 and 50, something shifted inside me. The fog of self-doubt began to clear, and I remembered who Dorothy Mae Henderson really was. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed in my favorite dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that Harold always said brought out my eyes, and I went to see my daughter Margaret. "Mama," she said when she opened the door. "You look like yourself again." I told Margaret everything. About Vivian's comments, about my shame, about how I'd been hiding from my own life. And my daughter, wise beyond her years, listened without judgment. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think it's time you learned something about Vivian that Tommy doesn't know." Margaret had done some research, as daughters sometimes do when they're protective of their mothers. It turned out that Vivian came from very humble beginnings herself, much humbler than she'd led anyone to believe. She'd grown up in a trailer park 2 counties over, and her designer clothes and superior attitude were newer acquisitions than anyone realized. "She's trying so hard to forget where she came from," Margaret explained, "that she's forgotten how to be kind to people who remind her of her past." This information didn't excuse Vivian's behavior, but it helped me understand it. And understanding, I'd learned over the years, was the first step toward forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to forgive just yet. First, I had some shopping to do. You see, Harold's letter had reminded me of something important. Dignity doesn't come from what you wear, but that doesn't mean you can't wear nice things if you choose to. The difference was in the choosing, doing it for yourself, not because someone else made you feel inadequate. I took a portion of Harold's life insurance money I'd been saving for emergencies, and I went shopping. But this time, I didn't go alone. I hired a personal shopper, a lovely woman named Grace who specialized in helping mature women find their style. "What's your goal here?" Grace asked as we sat in the consultation room at the nicest department store in the city. "I want to look like the best version of myself," I told her. "Not like someone else, just like me, but polished." And that's exactly what we did. Grace helped me find clothes that fit my body, my lifestyle, and my budget. We chose classic pieces in good fabrics, a beautiful wool coat, several well-cut dresses, some elegant blouses and skirts. Nothing too trendy, nothing too young, but everything was quality. The most important purchase was a handbag. Not just any handbag, but a genuine Chanel bag, the same brand Vivian carried like a badge of honor. It cost more than I'd ever spent on a single item in my life, but it was an investment. Not in the bag itself, but in the lesson it would teach. When I walked out of that store, I felt different. Not because I was wearing expensive clothes, but because I had reclaimed my right to make choices about my own life. I looked good, I felt confident, and I remembered what it was like to hold my head high. The real test came the following Sunday. Tommy had invited me to brunch at their country club, the same country club where Vivian liked to show off her sophisticated lifestyle. I accepted the invitation without hesitation. I wore my new navy dress with the matching jacket, my new shoes, and carried my Chanel bag with quiet pride. When I walked into that dining room, I felt like the woman I'd always been inside, dignified, graceful, and completely comfortable in my own skin. Tommy's face lit up when he saw me. "Mom, you look absolutely beautiful," he said, giving me a warm hug. But it was Vivian's reaction that told the real story. Her eyes went straight to my handbag, and I saw her expression change from surprise to confusion to something that looked almost like respect. "Dorothy," she said slowly, "is that a Chanel bag?" "Yes, dear," I replied calmly. "It is." "But how did you... where did you..." For the first time since I'd known her, Vivian was speechless. She understood the significance of that bag, understood what it cost, and understood that I had chosen to buy it. The woman she'd dismissed as hopelessly unfashionable had walked into her world carrying a status symbol she probably couldn't afford herself. But the real surprise came during brunch. Instead of making snide comments about my appearance, Vivian asked about my clothes. Where had I shopped? Who had helped me? How had I known what to choose? I answered her questions graciously, without mentioning the months of hurt she'd caused me. I talked about grace, about finding your own style, about the importance of feeling comfortable in your own skin. You know, Vivian said hesitantly. I never learned how to shop properly. My mother never taught me about quality versus quantity, about building a wardrobe instead of just buying clothes. It was the first genuine thing I'd ever heard her say. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Vivian began calling me for advice. Not about fashion, though we did discuss that, but about other things. How to make a house feel like a home, how to cook Harold's favorite pot roast, how to handle the church auxiliary committee when Mrs. Patterson got too bossy. She started visiting me at my house, sitting in Harold's old chair and asking questions about family traditions, about the stories behind the photographs on my mantle, about what it was like to be married for 40 years. One afternoon, as we sat in my kitchen sharing tea and my homemade cookies, Vivian said something that nearly knocked me over. Dorothy, I owe you an apology. I've been terrible to you, and I know it. I was so worried about not being good enough for this family that I tried to make you feel like you weren't good enough either. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. I reached across the table and took her hand. We all make mistakes, dear. The important thing is that we learn from them. But why are you being so kind to me? She asked, tears in her eyes. After everything I said and did? I thought about Harold's letter, about dignity and kindness, about the woman I wanted to be regardless of how others treated me. Because, I said, that's what family does. We forgive each other, we learn from each other, and we help each other become better people. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. We still had our moments of misunderstanding, our generational differences, our occasional clashes of personality. But something fundamental had changed. Vivian stopped seeing me as an embarrassment and started seeing me as a source of wisdom. I stopped seeing her as a threat and started seeing her as a young woman who needed guidance. The Chanel bag, by the way, sits in my closet most days. I don't need to carry it to feel confident anymore. It served its purpose. It got Vivian's attention and respect long enough for us to start a real conversation. Now, I'm back to carrying my practical everyday bag, and Vivian has never made another comment about my clothes. But I kept the rest of my new wardrobe. Not because I need expensive clothes to feel valuable, but because I learned that taking care of myself is a form of self-respect. I dress well because I choose to, not because anyone else expects me to. Tommy noticed the change in both of us, though I don't think he ever understood exactly what happened. He just knew that his mother and his wife had somehow become friends, and that was enough for him. Last month, Vivian asked if I would help her plan a surprise party for Tommy's birthday. We spent hours together, cooking his favorite foods, decorating the house, and coordinating with his friends. As we worked, she told me about her childhood, about feeling ashamed of her family's poverty, about her fear that she'd never really belong anywhere. You know what I've learned? She said, as we hung streamers in the dining room. Having nice things doesn't make you a nice person. I had to learn how to be kind from you. The party was a wonderful success. Tommy was genuinely surprised and touched by the effort we'd made. But the best part was watching Vivian interact with our extended family. She'd learned to listen to their stories, to ask about their lives, to find value in people regardless of their circumstances. As I watched her laughing with my nephew's wife about their shared love of gardening, I realized something important. I hadn't just taught Vivian about kindness and family. She'd taught me something too. She'd shown me that sometimes, when people are cruel, it's because they're fighting battles we can't see. And sometimes, the most powerful response to cruelty is not retaliation, but understanding. That doesn't mean we should accept poor treatment. It means we should stand up for ourselves with dignity, address the behavior directly, and then choose how we want to respond. I chose to respond with grace, but only after I'd reclaimed my self-respect. The Chanel bag taught me that I could play by anyone's rules if I chose to. But more importantly, It taught me that I didn't have to. I could set my own standards, define my own worth, and command respect simply by respecting myself. Now, when I see other women my age being dismissed or made to feel insignificant because of their appearance or their circumstances, I share my story. I tell them about the power of self-respect, about the importance of standing up for yourself, and about the surprising ways that kindness can transform relationships. I tell them about Harold's letter, about the difference between dignity and designer labels, about the courage it takes to be yourself in a world that's constantly telling you to be someone else. And I tell them that sometimes the best way to win is not to defeat your opponent, but to help them become a better person. Today, Vivian and I are planning a family vacation together. She calls me Mama Dorothy now, and she means it with genuine affection. We shop together sometimes, though she's learned to appreciate my practical style as much as I've learned to appreciate her flair for fashion. Last week, I overheard her talking to her sister on the phone. "You know," she was saying, "my mother-in-law taught me something important. She showed me that real class isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It's about how you treat people, especially when they can't do anything for you in return." As I sit here today, looking at that letter from Harold one more time before putting it away, I think about the journey that brought me to this point. It started with hurt and humiliation, but it led to understanding and genuine affection. It taught me about the difference between being a victim and being a survivor, between accepting poor treatment and transforming difficult relationships. Most importantly, it reminded me that dignity is not something that can be taken away from you. It can only be given away, and that's always a choice. I am Dorothy Mae Henderson. I am 67 years old. I have buried my husband, raised my children, and survived more challenges than I care to count. I wear what makes me comfortable. I speak what I believe, and I treat others with the respect I expect.